can read about it on the Googles all you want until you live it. You do not understand what Alzheimer's does and how it affects the loved one, the patient, and everybody in their sphere, right? I mean, like, it's exhausting. It's frustrating.
You're listening to A Look Behind Alzheimer's. Who's taking care of the caregivers? I'm Sami.
And I'm Shea, and we worked with Jazmine, Jenny, and Sapna. Today we sat down with former caretaker Peg Prentice to get a behind-the-scenes look at caring for a family member with Alzheimer's.
Many families with loved ones with Alzheimer's find it difficult to find a caregiver, and many have different beliefs as to how the loved one should be treated, in a nursing home or somewhere else. Due to the fact that there are so many different cultures in the United States, there are various beliefs as to how and where they care for their loved one. Nursing home care is expensive in the United States, making it much harder to be accessed to many different people, causing others to find different options for their loved ones.
The New York University Caregiver Intervention was implemented in our case study. Its main mission was to improve the ability of the caregiver to withstand the difficulties of caregiving and to defer the need for institutionalization of the family member with dementia. The programs allowed individual and family counseling, participation in a caregiver support group, and the ongoing telephone-based availability of counselors.
This intervention had many pros and cons. Some of the pros included the intervention addresses the mental health implications on caretakers of loved ones with Alzheimer's and dementia. It brings to light an issue that is underrated and not spoken about enough. It provides the families extra support and information on how to give proper care. It also lessens the financial stress on families who feel forced to put their loved one in a nursing home. It improved the overall health of not only the patient but the caregivers as well. It also elongated the time period of at-home care prior to putting a loved one in a nursing home.
As for the cons, a moral issue arises with the pressure put on families to take care of loved ones at home rather than putting them in a nursing home. The study leaves out those family members that cannot take care of the loved one full-time, yet are still impacted by the diagnosis. For the original intervention, it was delivered to urban caregivers who had agreed to participate in the intervention. In contrast, the Minnesota intervention, which was delivered later, was delivered onto rural caregivers who received social services and had not actively volunteered for the intervention. It would be unethical to take into account participants who are unwilling to be there. Also, the pressure to take care of the loved one at home could potentially cause an uptick in mistreatment due to the family's lack of training compared to nurses in a nursing home.
As stated before, we sat down with Miss Peg Prentice, who was formerly employed at NIH. She is currently a high school science teacher who has a history of caregiving. Her mother and grandmother both suffered from Alzheimer's, leaving Peg to take care of them both at an early age. We sat down and discussed her experience as a caretaker and the mental effects on her and her family. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our podcast. My name is Samantha Martin.
My name is Jazmine Moore.
My name is Sapna David.
My name is Jenny Lack.
And I'm Shea O'Connor.
And today we have a very special guest on our podcast, Miss Peg Prentice.
Hello. Thank you all so much for having me today on your podcast. I'm really excited. This is my first time on doing something like this. So, let's rock and roll.
That's awesome. We're so excited to have you. Now for our first question, how has dementia or Alzheimer's been a part of your life?
It's been a big part of my life. My mom had Alzheimer's and ultimately passed away from it. And it was a very long haul, over 10 years.
Sorry to hear that.
And she had a good life, and even while she was battling Alzheimer's, she still had she was living the best life she could. So, what can I say? And I was one of her caregivers. The main caregiver for my mom was my sister-in-law. And what we did was we moved my mom from Bethesda, Maryland to a very small town called Colonial Beach, Virginia, where my brother and sister-in-law and many of my nieces live. And then, so my sister-in-law was the main caregiver for quite some time, and I would go down every weekend as like relief caregiver for over 10 years. Um, and then eventually she was put into a care facility, and I still kept going down every weekend, to visit and whatnot. So while I wasn't the main person, I certainly was very much involved.
So, what were some of your biggest roles as a caregiver for your mother?
Uh, Doing the hard job of convincing my brother that there was something wrong was the first big one. Like I said, my brother lived out of state, and at the time, he had a job which required him to be gone a lot. He was a salesman, and so he was frequently out of the country, and so he didn't see her with the regularity that I did at the time. And I started to notice that things were off, like things that she was doing weren't making sense. Like there was like hoarding going on. My mom went to the store every single day to get groceries, and she would get like 2 bags of groceries, and she lived by herself in a 4-bedroom house. And I noticed that the refrigerator and the freezer downstairs and her pantry were completely packed with food. And I was really worried. I'm like, man, to my brother, I'm like, we need to go over and do like a clean out because you have to see this for yourself. And so we went over and cleaned out like a ton of stuff. And within maybe a couple months, it was right back to it. And I'm like, the freezer isn't holding the cold anymore because there's so much stuff. I'm afraid she's going to eat something bad. Then I started to get like phone calls that were really strange. She would be like, you stole my checkbook. I'm like, what are you talking about? I teach in Baltimore, Mom. I haven't been to your house in forever. And then we would find the checkbook like in the freezer or something like that. So it was like little things like that. And I kept trying to talk to my siblings. I'm one of 4, trying to express to my siblings that something was wrong and that I thought we needed to step in. And eventually that's what happened.
Did that play did that have a big impact on your mental health during that time?
At that point, not as bad as it would later, but definitely, yeah, God, every time she got in the car, I was scared to death she was going to wrap it around a tree. And then with like her behavior changed. There were post-it notes everywhere, absolutely everywhere, like little reminders to herself to do something or buy something or whatever. I also noticed at the time that my mom, who was a big animal lover her whole life, was writing copious checks to anybody who sent her any sort of solicitation. She would write a check and be giving, like thousands of dollars away. I'm like, Mom, what are you doing? I mean, I know you love that the Humane Society and ASPCA, but you don't need to like give to every single thing. Um, you know, uh, it, it was hard, and coming to the decision that she was unable to care for herself was very difficult. And my brother happened to have the resources, I guess, to bring her to Colonial Beach and have her live a block from his house in a home that he owned, that he rented. And so we like set her up down there, and we kept trying to get her to come and trying to get her to come, and she would not do it. And basically, and this is going to sound horrible, we had her come down for a holiday and we never took her home. Like we all knew what was going to go down, but we knew if we told her that she would just lose it. And so that's how she came to live at Colonial Beach. So she was still kind of like living independently with my sister-in-law over there several times a day, and me coming on weekends and staying in the house and whatever. And then eventually moving to the full care of a nursing home. I totally forgot what your question was. I'm sorry. You know me, Sammy.
You're okay. No, it's completely fine. As far as the decision to put her in a home following that experience, was that difficult on your family?
Yes. Yes, because we were all like hoping, we knew that she was happier, kind of like living on her own terms, but with supervision. And she was deathly afraid of being put into a home. My grandmother also had dementia, and my mom took care of her for as long as she could. I grew up watching dementia care, and eventually my mom had to put her in a nursing home, and it was not a good experience. Let's put it that way. And so my mom had a big fear of being put in a nursing home, and used to make us swear when we were growing up that we would never do it. But it got to the point where we were just unable to give her the care that she desperately needed without cracking ourselves. Does that make sense? I mean,
Yeah.
as a child, you want to do the best you can for your parent. And finally saying, okay, this is beyond our capabilities. You know, we have to have help here, was tough.
Yeah. Did you have a good support system during that time? Because I know dealing with that would be very difficult on you and your family as well.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, I feel like we were luckier than most in that three of the four siblings were able to pull together. So I have two brothers and a sister, and um, my one brother, his wife was freaking phenomenal. She was absolutely phenomenal, and he was awesome too when he could be home, but he was still traveling, doing his job. My other brother, like me, would come every single weekend, but he would come like on a Sunday morning and have coffee with her and visit and whatever, but then he always had to go. And my sister was unable to participate in the care because she had some very serious issues of her own that she had to deal with. But she was there as often as she could be. So I feel like in some respects, we're luckier than most people. Plus, we had my nieces down there who were adults by this point that could help out. But it was definitely a lot. And I'm glad that when I was in college, I made the decision to get my CNA license in order to know how to care for my mother when the time came. So I knew like how to make a bed with somebody in it. I knew, how to work a bedpan and all of that stuff. And I worked on a dementia unit for the short time that I did that before I went to work at NIH. So that was helpful, and I think that kind of helped extend the time we had with her. But there's I also feel like, my brother had resources that most people do not have. Had my brother Michael, and his wife Joan, had they not been able to have that house to put her in, had they not been able to have the money to put her into a nursing home, I don't know what we would have done, because I'm a teacher and my other brother Larry works in a warehouse, and my sister, like I said, had other things going on and was unable to help. So I feel like, there's a lot of people out there that just do it themselves, and they're unpaid caregivers, and they don't have resources like that. And, you know, it's incredibly difficult for families who are caring for a loved one with Alzheimer's. And there really needs to be some changes to how we deal with this. to support the caregivers, to help with bills and make sure that these folks get the care they need and that they're not languishing.
Yeah. I know like that caused a big mental health strain on everyone. That must have been a very difficult time for you.
Yeah.
If you had the support from an organization that gave you like mental health support or like group therapy with other people that are going through similar situations, do you think you would have taken advantage of the opportunity and benefited from it?
Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. Um, you get the diagnosis of Alzheimer's and you think you know what that means, right? So you think, okay, well, they're just senile. And it's not the same. Dementia and senility are two very different things. And you can read about it on the Googles all you want until you live it. You do not understand what Alzheimer's does and how it affects um, the 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 loved one, the patient, and everybody in their sphere, right? I mean, like it's exhausting, it's frustrating, it's incredibly sad. At times, it's freaking hysterically funny and awesome. Um, but I didn't know a whole lot about it, and I certainly would have benefited maybe talking to other folks out there who were going through the same thing. And I'm not like an internet person. I don't think I would have done like an online kind of thing because that's just not my jam. But I certainly would have gone to like a group therapy thing or even, well, I would do Zoom. Like we didn't even know Zoom was an option. It probably wasn't when my mom had Alzheimer's, but I mean, like Zoom is a great way to meet with people without having to like leave the house and go to a physical meeting. But yeah, it would have been huge to have that support and learning opportunity and stuff like that. I mean, it just wasn't there that any of us knew of.
Yeah. Now, as far as like long-term effects on you and your family goes, do you have any, would you say?
Yeah, I would say that it brought out who we are to each other. And by that, I mean, like, my brothers and my sister and I are not close, like some families are. I mean, we see each other at the holidays and whatever, but my brother Larry is 12 years older than me. My brother Michael is 5 years older than me. My sister's 2 years younger. And each of us have wildly varying lives and circumstances. And the house we grew up in, like my brother Larry, I didn't know him as a person because he was so much older than me. By the time I was like coming up, he was gone and out of the house, and starting his life. But I would say that when this happened, it brought us all together and it showed us all who each of us really was as a person, not your assumption of, you know, who's going to do what and whatever. And we pulled together, I think, really well. So that is something that stayed with us having gone through this, is that now we're much closer than we were. Um, and there's not a lot of fighting. I know in some families, dementia can wreck a family. And thankfully in ours, it made us closer. It certainly makes me more cognizant when friends and acquaintances talk about dealing with an elderly parent having gone through this, you know, to say, oh, you should look into this, or here's a great program, or here's an adult daycare program. So I know about all of these other things that I certainly had no idea of before. And for me personally, it was tough emotionally for me. And I still wrestle with that today. Um, Growing up, my mom was not Mrs. Brady from the Brady Bunch, if you know what I mean. It was it was oftentimes not a happy household. And living with dementia can make your personality crystallize and you become more intensely yourself. So it was really hard hearing her say to me things that she had said to me as a kid that were incredibly hurtful. And I had to keep telling myself, okay, she's not, she doesn't mean it, she can't control it, whatever. And it brings up like a lot of stuff from the past. It was weird hearing her talk about me to me because she didn't realize, she'd be like, have you seen Peggy? And I'm like, yeah, I heard she's around somewhere. And then she would launch off into some story or whatever. And some days that was great. And some days that was horrible, like the stuff that she would say. But when she got into that mid stage toward that later end, right before they become non-communicative, she softened and was able to say things that she had never ever said to me before that meant a great deal to me. And I'm glad that I was there to hear that. I'm glad that, I don't know, it could have been the Alzheimer's speaking, but I'm taking it for the good.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you guys got peace at the end of that. I think that's really important as well. So I'd like to thank you for your time today.
Sure.
I really appreciate you sitting down and being open with us and talking about.
For many families who have a loved one diagnosed with Alzheimer's, finding a caretaker can be extremely tough. Some are opposed to putting their loved one in a nursing home, and some go for it right away. Others struggle financially to get help or are unable to take time away from their jobs to be the caregiver. This also means that caregivers, whether family members or staff in the nursing home, are greatly affected mentally by this experience.
For our podcast, we looked at a case study designed to provide support for caregivers because the impacts of Alzheimer's and dementia does not only take a toll on the patient, but also the ones who care for them. The New York University Caregiving Intervention was created in New York in the mid-1980s and took place in Minnesota at multiple sites. It provided psychosocial interventions in order to lessen the burden on the caregivers and give them an outlet to express how they are feeling. It began in 2008, and they called it the Minnesota Family Memory Care Program.
The program begins with the intensive phase, which consists of 2 individual and 4 family counseling sessions within 4 months of enrollment. After this, support continues to be available through counseling and participation in a support group, which are recommended, and a place where caregivers can share tips, experiences, and ways that they cope.
Assessments were taken at different checkpoints during the program, and they showed that the intervention helped to decrease the rates of both depression and distress among caregivers. Additionally, the researchers discovered that the longer time in the caregiving counseling program correlated to more time that a person with dementia was at home rather than in a nursing home.
Caregiving is a big part of people's lives when they have someone in their life with Alzheimer's. Not many people focus on how much responsibility their role can come with and how it can affect them mentally, but these caregivers need help. There needs to be more mental support for caregivers to help lessen the burden they feel.
Our group would like to say a big thank you to Ms. Peg Prentice for joining our podcast as a guest speaker. We would also like to thank Talia for helping us along the way. Thank you all for listening. This has been a look behind Alzheimer's. Who's taking care of the caregivers? See you next time.